It's been nice with Wasteland 2 in that we can focus on a lot of different things that we were limited to in the first Wasteland, right? I mean, we didn't have a lot of disk space, so there wasn't much on the music side. And, we were so limited on disk space that we even had to take some of the text and put it offline in a paragraph book because there wasn't enough disk space.
It's been really important to me personally to be one of the guardians of the heritage of the original Wasteland 1. Wasteland 1 was the thing that brought me into this industry in the first place. I played it on my college roommate's computer, and 9 months later I was asking Brian Fargo for a job, and it was my goal then to be able to do Wasteland 2 in 1989. So all these years later, I've taken upon myself to make sure that we're showing enough respect to the subject matter.
So we had all of our paper designs that got created by Chris Avalone, and Brian created a couple levels in the game. Colin McComb created a couple. Nathan Long had a pretty good hand in a lot of those. And so once we got those designs, it's a matter of taking what's on the paper and working with the team on a day-to-day basis to make sure that all of those elements, or I guess the ones that are the most important to what the players can actually see at the end, get in there.
What I love that we did in Wasteland 1 is I love taking things to their ridiculous conclusions. The first one was Bobby with the kid where you shot his dog and then he became hostile and then you end up shooting him and then there's a gravestone for where he is and his dog and then the other kids attack and it just sort of goes from bad to worse. I love taking things all the way down to their ridiculous conclusion as much as possible.
We wanted to make sure that it wasn't necessary to have knowledge of Wasteland 1 to be able to play and enjoy Wasteland 2. But it was important to us to have continuity of the lore of the Wasteland world. So there are characters from the original product that show up in our game. Some of the original Ranger party members like Snake Vargas is there, Angela Death is there, and they're really NPCs that you get to interact with, but you're starting with your own unique party. There's also sort of a continuity in some of the locations. In the first half of the game that takes place in Arizona, where the original game was set, a lot of the locations are the same. The Rail Nomads Village, the Ag Center, High Pool, the prison, which was the original Ranger Citadel in Wasteland 1, are all there for you to be able to see what they look like.
So Matt and I kind of focused on design elements and wrangling those, and Matt stayed in a lot more of the level design area and dealing with all of the encounters and handling the writers and making sure that they were staying on task. And I focused more in the system design and day-to-day operation, I guess, of making sure that each of the team members knew what they were doing daily and they were feeling the love.
The thing about RPGs, well, at least the kind that we're making, that makes it tricky also, is that you can shoot anyone. And so it's not like we close all these things off. We have to account for the fact that you can go in any given encounter and pull out your gun. We might not win the combat, but we have to deal with the circumstances of such that you've made somebody hostile or in fact have killed them.
And we want the things that you do to come back to help you or haunt you, sometimes immediately and sometimes much further into the gameplay. We kind of talk about the cause and effect on a micro level and a macro level. Sometimes it's just the things I do within a conversation affect the way that conversation goes, affects whether I get an item or not, whether I get a quest or not. And sometimes it's the things I do in this conversation are going to affect something that happens much later in the product. And some of that delayed macro level cause and effect, I think, has the biggest impact for the player.
Another aspect of Wasteland, which I loved and also got a great reaction, was the way CNPCs behaved in the game. And that's something that we want to take to the next level. So it's one thing, you have your Rangers, you tell them what to do, they do it. However, you get people to join your party and they might not necessarily do exactly what you tell them to do. So in the first game, it might have been something simple like shoot this rat, and they empty an entire Uzi clip into the thing, and ammo is pretty precious. So when you're wasting an entire clip on a rat with 8 hit points, you're kind of pissed, And so I love that aspect of it. And so we're going to take that to the next level with NPCs in your party that steal from you, hide during combat, and do any number of different things besides just wasting ammo. So that there's a personality to them, but there's also a personality element that affects gameplay. And that's what makes it interesting, is when it actually affects the variables of the game state.
So for the first 6 months of what we called our pre-production period, I was managing all of our out-of-house writers to create the script, and that was sort of establishing the overall story arc and then all the individual areas of the game and how all the individual designs could work on their own and plug into the entire game.
When we did the first Wasteland, we had a writing team, and we've done the same thing with the sequel. And the benefit you get from that is that everybody has their own style and their own things that are important to them. And so you end up getting people that all approach subjects differently.
Working with this number of writers who are all kind of working simultaneous is a lot like herding cats. And we tried to approach it in the most organized way we can. So the first thing we did was we brought Mike Stackpole out and we sat around for a couple days and we worked out what we kind of wanted to be the primary story arc that we knew all the levels of the game wanted to fit into. And then once we'd established the story flow, we figured out what the actual locations were going to need to be for the individual levels to tell the story that we wanted to tell.
We all sat around the table and just talked through the entirety of the Wasteland design, and everybody looks at it a little bit differently, right? And so I'm there more talking about how it's going to tie into some of the gameplay systems and, just trying to wrap my head around the complete clusterfuck of a scope that it was initially and how that we were going to take that down. Can I say clusterfuck? Sure. And how how you can take that into a reasonable design.
Once we had that much information, we brought in the rest of the writers and gave them each assignments of the different areas of the game. Chris Avallone was working on High Pool and Ag Center, and Colin McComb was working on Coliseum, and Nathan Long has been worked on a couple of unique levels at the beginning, but he's kind of been the last man standing on the writers, and he's been working with us to make sure that all of these individual levels written by the different writers have continuity. We're using the same terms, we're using the same language, we're talking to the player in the same way, and we've been sort of molding the script that all the various writers did to make one cohesive story.
Each area feels very different. You'll play the game from beginning to end, and there's never a sense of, I've already seen this before, I've already heard that before.
Nathan's there looking at it from kind of a pure narrative arc sense, and Colin is definitely bringing his own wackiness to the table, and Chris has been doing this for so long that he is really good at asking questions that seed ideas.
There's a lot of witty writing. I mean, we had one guy who was just wonderful with the one-liners, and there's a lot of combat barks, which is what happens when you come onto the map. What do they say to you, before combat? What do they say to you as you're exiting combat or running away from them? And there's just wonderful one-liner. I mean, there's 300, I think, characters in Wasteland 2, and the great number of them, there's a line written for every single one.
It was clear very early that one of the things our backers wanted most from the writing for Wasteland 2 was to not be afraid of words, to sort of reestablish that literary feel of the old school RPG. And so that was our primary goal, is to have as much quality storytelling as we possibly can and not be afraid of having all that content be in there. And the second part of it was to layer on top of the story we're trying to tell as much reactivity and as much cause and effect as humanly possible. We want the people in the world to react to the actions of the party.
The whole second and third and fourth and fifth passes of, okay, what happens when the player does this and they do that, or what's the gender makeup of the party, or what events have happened in the world, and that could generate sort of smart-ass remarks. What's the reactivity from the desert rangers and the radio stations? So the writing is a big part of what we hang our hat on, and so it's really a critical part of making a great RPG.